7 of English 121. This is a re-recording of our lecture from last week. I apologize for the technical errors. Sometimes computers do not operate the way that you wish that they would. So here it is, week 7 lecture one more time. So this week you will be watching this lecture on symbol. You'll also read the selections from chapter 7 on symbol and watch the video on symbol as part of the interactive text. Then I'd like you to close read the 2 short stories, The Chrysanthemums by John Steinbeck and The Ones Who Walk Away from Amelius by Ursula Le Guin. Then for this week we'll be doing a conversation about mining for symbols, trying to find symbols in writing, and then you'll be doing a reflection journal where you'll be looking at a story and finding symbols in it. Alright, so begin by watching Dana Joya's video on symbol, which is found in our e-text, reading pages 239 to 241 and then 271 to 272. And I want you to really think about as you're reviewing all this content, try to think about what a symbol is. It can be a person, a place, or a thing, or even a situation in a story that suggests more than its literal meaning. Symbols have multiple meanings, and understanding their symbolic meaning really enhances your understanding of the story. Most excellent literature contains multi-layers of symbols. I have a picture at the bottom here of the eyes from The Great Gatsby, the billboard with these eyes that are watching over the characters. And this symbol's been greatly interpreted throughout literature. So it's a good example of a symbol, but there's plenty of symbols that you'll have no problem finding once you think about symbol in all of the stories we've read so far. In an allegory, something only has one specific meaning, but symbols, they can have many meanings, and being an excellent close reader means you can understand these symbols as it relates to the author's theme. So what does a symbol mean compared to, what does a symbol contribute to us understanding the theme of the story? So how do you identify a symbol? The first thing you want to look for is, does it appear more than once, right? If something appears more than once in a story, especially in a short story, chances are it's very important. Is it named in the title? That's a clear indicator, like for example in one of the stories we're reading this week, that the thing mentioned in the title is very important to the story. Does it open or end the story? Oftentimes the story will end with a symbolic moment or a reference to a symbolic thing, or it'll end with it. And does it lead to the author's theme? You want to consider a symbolic object's relevance to the plot. What does the symbol mean to the protagonist of the story? And remember that in literature, a few symbols are hidden. You will be able to find symbols. They are not difficult to find. So how do you understand a symbol? Once you find it, you've identified it, what do you do with it? You really need to, this is where critical thinking really comes into play. So if you're thinking about a chrysanthemum, there's your own personal associations that you have about this flower. And then there's a greater meaning as it has to do with the story. What do these chrysanthemums mean to the main character of the story? What do they mean in the relationship of the whole story, right? And then thinking about chrysanthemums and their cultural meaning, or other stories that have chrysanthemums in them, or what it means to, what a chrysanthemum means as a flower, right? There's a whole language of flowers. It's really going deeper and thinking even greater about the symbol. And this goes for every single symbol you find in a short story. So when you write about symbols, there's a checklist, just like we have for all of our different aspects of fiction. So please go through this and really look at how to think about a symbol when you're writing about it. But let's talk a little bit about the chrysanthemums. This is a really brilliant story by John Steinbeck, and I really want you to think about, begin by thinking about how this story even, just how it begins, because the short story Chrysanthemums begins with one of the most brilliant descriptions of setting that really sets up the whole feeling of the story. When you read that first paragraph, what feelings do you feel about the characters who are in the story, about the setting? What does the setting do really to set up what's going to happen? So if you read, the high gray flannel fog of winter closed off the Salinas Valley from the sky and from all the rest of the world. Right? That first sentence gives us such isolation. On every side it sat like a lid on the mountains and made the great valley a closed pot. Again, a symbol of isolation and closure. Whoever's in that valley is cut off from the rest of the world. On the broad, level land floor, the gang plows bit deep and left the black earth shining like metal where the shares had cut. On the foothill ranches across the Salinas Valley, the yellow stubble fields seemed to be bathed in pale, cold sunshine. But there was no sunshine in the valley now in December. The thick willow scrub along the river flamed with sharp and positive yellow leaves. So again, you feel through the description that Steinbeck presents in the very beginning of the story, you can compare this to what Kate Chopin was doing with The Storm. That idea of really using the setting as a way to set up the mood of the story. This is going to be the mood that carries through throughout the whole story. So when we first meet Elisa Allen in her garden, what details does Steinbeck delineate her character for us? What is she like in her garden, right, as opposed to when she's not in her garden? I want you to think through these questions. Elisa works inside a wire fence that protected her flower garden from cattle and dogs and chickens, right? This is paragraph 9. What does this wire fence suggest? What is it keeping out? How would you describe Henry and Elisa's marriage? Cite details from the story. How is their marriage? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it balanced? Is it imbalanced? With what motive does the traveling salesman take an interest in Elisa's chrysanthemums? What immediate effect does his interest have on Elisa? This is a really important part of the story because she's in her garden when this happens and she's showing him the chrysanthemums. I really want you to pay attention to what's going on. Also, I want you to think about what these traveling salesmen were like for these families. This is before, these were very isolated farms, so she wasn't going to town very often, right? There wasn't a lot of interaction between farms. There were no ways to communicate between farms. So this tinker, this guy that goes from place to place selling stuff, he carries with him stories and information. For what purpose does Steinbeck give us such a detailed account of Elisa's preparations for her evening out? Notice her tearing off her soiled clothes and scrubbing her body with pumice. That's very important. Pay attention to that. Of what significance to Elisa is the sight of the contents of the flower pot discarded in the road? Notice that as her husband's car overtakes the covered wagon, Elisa averts her eyes, and then Steinbeck adds, "In a moment it was over. The thing was done. She did not look back." Explain this passage. It's very important. How do you interpret Elisa's asking for wine with dinner? How do you account for her new interest in prize fights? In a sentence, try to state the story's theme. And when you state the theme, remember, use the symbols that have been brought to your attention by answering these questions. Why are Elisa Allen's chrysanthemums so important to this story? Sum up what you understand them to mean. Now, you do not have to write out answers to these questions. You are only using these as a way to understand how symbols are working in the story. All right, we're going to do the same thing for the ones who walk away from Amelia's. Now, this is a science fiction story. It's by Ursula Le Guin, who I had the great honor of meeting a week and a half ago, or indirectly at a giant reading, but I got to hear her read and talk about writing. the story is about a dystopian society. It's not a utopia, it's a dystopia. It's the opposite of a utopia. And in this society, there's a cost for things being so perfect. And that cost is the central symbol of this story. So when you think about it, I want you to think about, does the narrator live in Amelia's? What do we know about the narrator's society? So what do you learn about the society as you read the first few paragraphs of this story? What's the narrator's opinion about Amelia's? Does the author seem to share that opinion with the narrator? Are they of the same mind? What is the narrator's attitude toward the ones who walk away from Amelia's? Would the narrator have been one of those who walked away? And something for you to think about, would you be one who walks away from Amelia's? How do you account for the narrator's willingness to let readers add anything they like to the story? Here's an example. If an orgy would help, don't hesitate on paragraph 3. Doesn't Ursula Le Guin care what her story includes? What do you think this kind of author intrusion means? And what is suggested by the locked dark cellar in which the child sits? What other details in the story are suggestive enough to be called symbolic? Do you find in the story any implied criticism of our own society? Now again, I want you to just think about these questions as you go through and read the stories yourself. You will be using these as a way to talk about symbols in both of these stories. Alright, so for our conversation this week, you will be mining for symbols. Which objects, actions, or places seem unusually significant in these two short stories? I need you to find at least 3. And how did you identify each of these as a symbol? Why do you think the author is using this symbol? How does it convey meaning or promote a theme in the story? So, at this point, you guys are working on your essays. They are due March 12th. I will say that for your conversation, you will have through this Saturday as well. I will keep it open an extra week due to the fact that you didn't have this lecture available to you on Wednesday due to the sound errors. So you will have an extra week to complete your weekly tasks. But your paper is still due on March 12th. That's at 11:59 p.m. You will not be doing a peer review. You are only working on creating a final draft and following the assignment details. Please let me know if you have any questions about it. Finally, in your reflection journal, I'd like you to choose one of the stories that we've read so far in this class. Describe your experience of reading that story and of encountering its symbols. At what point did the main symbol's meaning become clear? What in the story indicated the larger importance of that symbol? What do the symbols tell you about the overall theme of the story? Alright guys, that's it. Starting on Wednesday of this week, we are going to be kicking off our poetry unit. It's going to be great, and I will be teaching you how to close read poetry starting next week. So don't forget, your fiction papers are due March 12th by 11:59 p.m. If after watching this video you still have questions, please feel free to contact me. See you online.